welcome to The Descriptivists. This is a podcast about language, literacy, and linguistics. In each episode, we'll discuss a scholarly article and offer our insights on it. I'm your host, Michael Mowney. In this episode, we'll be discussing a study from the proceedings of Rangsit University's International Research Conference 2020 entitled "What are the factors affecting writing skills as perceived by undergraduate students in the English academic writing class?" by Vorapon, Mahakaew. Alright, I'm joined today with my guest and fellow conversation partner, Josh Iddings. Dr. Josh Iddings, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing good, Mike. How you doing?
Good. You want to introduce yourself real quick? What line of work you're in, and you kind of helped me pick this particular article. What was interesting about it for you?
Yeah. I am an academic interested in a couple of different areas in terms of research and stuff. Writing, composition, rhetoric, those sorts of things. Interested in Appalachian studies, and currently I live in upstate New York where I teach. But I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, and of course have lived in a couple of different places and presented research in various conferences and such across in different parts of the world, actually, and work on trying to write and read about issues around language and teaching English, teaching composition, and those kinds of things. This article for me kind of stood out because it is about students like mine and like students that I've had in classes before. So focusing on undergraduate writers is something that is of interest to me as someone who teaches undergraduate writers. And so I think that's why this sort of jumped out to me, in terms of students' perceptions of writing.
That was also my interest too. It's interesting that you mentioned the presentations. This is I guess it's not properly an article. It's more of it's conference proceedings, right? This is at Rangsit University in Thailand, and this is conference proceedings from 2020. So yeah, one of the reasons I was interested in, I'm always trying to find just kind of voices that haven't been heard much, and kind of studies that fall under the radar. People don't notice them too much, and so I hadn't heard of this and thought it might be interesting to look at, and definitely the connection to what are the writing skills that undergraduates perceive. That was one thing that was really interesting. This is about undergraduate perception of writing skills. So that's an angle that I think has been examined before, but seeing in this context that I'm not as familiar with, that was something that I was interested in. So let's real quick read the abstract here from Vorapon, Mahakaew. So the purpose of the study is to investigate the factors affecting writing skills of undergraduate students of Rangsit University. A number of the participants were 60. They studied in English academic writing in term January 2018 at Rangsit University. A questionnaire was used as the instrument to collect data. Questionnaires were divided into four main parts: general information, students' interest, ability in writing and awareness of writing skills, and student strategy and attitude toward writing in English, and factors causing students to have errors in writing. Those were the main parts there. The data were analyzed by using frequency percentages and means. The findings of the study revealed that the most found errors were vocabulary knowledge and active-passive voice. Also, article usage was the third factor affecting their English writing skills. So, just to kind of get started, first thoughts, initial impressions of the article here. I guess we'll call it an article, even though it's proceedings. I don't know exactly what else we would call it, but
Right, right. I think initially I was interested in some of the things in their in the author's introduction, in terms of some of the literature that they reviewed. Pretty common thing that we have to do when we start off an academic article, to talk about what's kind of been said around the area. And there were a couple things, studies here that they mentioned that I thought stood out to me. Um, in the second paragraph, they say Geisler and Studley 2001 stated that if the person has the ability to compose an extended text, it's considered the single best predictor of success in coursework during the freshman year. Also, Benjamin and Chun, 2003, revealed that a good indicator of the value added by higher education derived from how learners developed their informative and analytical writing ability. For me, that kind of stood out as kind of pointing to the importance of writing for our students at the undergraduate level, and that how much a student's success can be wrapped up in their ability to communicate in writing. um, I think that might be something you kind of feel should be the case, but it was interesting to me that they kind of started off with that, just showing us how central learning how to write well is for our students.
yeah. When I read things like that, it's really cool that that stands out to you, because when Mahakaew says things like that, I just feel like, did you ever hear David Foster Wallace's commencement speech, "This is Water"?
I think I've heard about it. I don't think I've actually heard the speech.
You really got to at some point. It's really quite something, and it plays with cliche a little bit. Like, "This is Water" is from a joke that he starts it off with, and it goes something like, two fish were swimming in the school one day, and they passed this other fish, and the other fish says, uh, gee, the water sure is nice today, isn't it, fellas?" And the two other young fish, they don't say anything. They just look at the guy, and the other fish swims away, and the two young fish look at each other, and one goes to the other, "What the hell is water?" Um, and and I love that. I probably butchered the joke there, but when you say something like writing is really important for student success, that for me is like as a writing instructor, right? That's the water that I swim in, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but and so, like, seeing these studies that he's citing that say these things, I feel like this is water. This is just water, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, uh, but you're absolutely right. This is a skill among many other skills, right? That they could be developing, not just like semiotic skills. They could be developing, these mathematical skills or trade skills or whatever they're doing uh, in college. But this particular one is really critical for their success in academia. Absolutely. One of the things that kind of stood out to me is one of the, let's see, I think this was the section on strategy and attitude toward writing in English, right? And we can talk a little bit, I think, a little later about these constructs, how these particular uh, question items, how, like, what's the theme between them, how do they operate as trying to measure a similar construct. That's not immediately clear to me, but one thing that I thought was interesting, this is on table 8. Mike writes, as shown in table 8, the most rated strategy and attitude which the respondents indicated to be the highest level is, according to my opinion, English is a fundamental skill everyone should have. Um, and then later, the respondents point out, according to my opinion, writing English to communicate within the university can cause communication breakdown. So it's critical, but it also can cause uh, problems. This I don't know how much um, the researcher um, how much thought they put into the skill everyone should have. Like, who is everyone here? Like everyone in university or everyone in the world? Um, and I think this was interesting just from kind of a world English's perspective, right? Uh, because uh, we think about like English as lingua franca um, in, in the world, and the students seem here, and I think maybe even the teacher seem to be pushing this particular perspective, or have at least assented to that perspective that you got to learn English. Like it's this fundamental skill everyone should have. Um, uh, let's see what was the percentage here. 48.3% very often, so the highest level there. 35% were at 4, so this is a Likert scale. They were um, they were ranking uh, students' responses to these particular questions. Um, and I think some of these very often, sometimes, rarely, and never, they don't exactly match well with the particular question, but just ranking things from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Like the vast majority of the students say that I think English is a fundamental skill everyone should have. So there, in Thailand, it seems like, and in this particular university, we have this buy-in into the English as a lingua franca kind of idea.
Yeah, no, and I think that's even if you go back to the very beginning, I mean, that first paragraph makes that case right away. English is a universal language popular in the world. It is essential for almost everyone because English is the basic language which people around the world need to learn. It's also the language used to communicate with foreigners. In addition, English is important in everyday life, such as education, work, and tourism. So I think they are really making the case that it's beyond even the scope of just being able to survive in the university, but a thing that is important for their community as a whole.
Absolutely. When I worked abroad, as you know, that it absolutely was the case that English was the lingua franca. I was in a country with multiple different immigrant groups. I was one of the expats living there, um, and there were lots of different languages, but everyone had a little bit of English, and that was kind of how you could communicate. So certainly, in a lot of different situations, English is going to operate there as the lingua franca. Um, so, anything else that you thought was interesting here?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to deal with students' perceptions, just kind of in general. So I think it's important to know, what your students think about the subject matter that they're learning, how important they think it is, and those sorts of things, just to kind of get a good, I guess, barometer on the people that are sitting in front of you. Um, I think we have to be careful with how much of those perceptions we trust in terms of, when you ask a student what they struggle with or what's important, et cetera, about whatever you're teaching. It's good to know what they think is important. It's also good to know where they struggle. Maybe, I don't know if I want to say actually struggle, but I know that a lot of times students will report that they struggle with one particular thing. And it seems like with writing, a lot of students will say, "Oh, I struggle with grammar," for example. And they actually may not struggle with grammar. They may actually have problems with organization or, these other things, but they have no other way, maybe, of really describing what it is they struggle with. And so grammar seems like the thing that they kind of fall back to and say. Um,
Yeah.
But it's interesting to know, I think, as a teacher, as an educator, what they think they struggle with, because it could be a good place for you to kind of begin with discussions with them on those sorts of things. But is it interesting, even in the abstract, that the findings of the study reveal that the most found errors were vocabulary knowledge and active passive voice. Just makes you wonder, if you did another kind of study, would those actually be the things that those students struggled with?
Yeah, I think this was interesting in an EFL context. Um, if you look at factors causing students to have errors in writing, you talked about organization, and I think in the U.S. In rhetoric programs, there is this which we both have worked in and have experience with. Um, Rhetoric programs definitely seem to privilege these global issues as being more important than these what you might call more local issues, the grammar issues. And you're right, students focus on those kind of things. I don't know exactly why that is. Maybe it's, at least in the U.S., it might be like part of their K-12 training in writing, that they've been trained to think about writing in terms of the grammatical errors that they're making. Maybe that was what their teachers kind of focused on a lot. And so that's what they go to when you ask them, what do you struggle with? But if you had done a different study with different questions that focused on some of those global issues, I wonder if you would find something different, or if you would find something
Mhm.
very similar. If you would say, oh yeah, I'm good on these global issues, but it's these local issues that I still struggle with.
Yeah, as you were speaking, it kind of occurred to me that when we think about how we use language, socially, um, and those grammatical errors, or just errors in, kind of, pronunciation, those sorts of things, that those are the kinds of things that I think stand out for people. When you hear this, unfortunate phrase like broken English. um, those are the kinds of things I think that stand out for people. And I think, as students, you could be, as a student, you can, of another language, you can be, pretty self-conscious about how you sound to other people who are using language. And so, and I think popular culture wise, we people really focus on grammar issues. I mean, you can see on people's social media, if somebody makes a grammar mistake, they can get flamed for it or whatever. So I think there's that kind of like, self-conscious use of language, and just sort of feeling like, it's such a maybe glaring error to the listener, to the speaker, when they hear those kinds of, grammatical issues, or they think, or somebody is perceived to have, a lack of vocabulary. Does that come off as them being, not intelligent, and those kinds of things? And that might stand out for somebody a bit more than, did they organize their paragraph in a way, when you're talking about the practical uses of English.
Yeah, absolutely. It really occurs to me, like, this is coming back to this is water a little bit for me, because uh we're weird, right? And I think it's quite fitting. I wonder if this is going to continue to happen in as I record these podcasts and everything, but um having a descriptivist perspective on writing and language is not normal. When we say we have a descriptivist perspective, we're trying to look at writing as it is and not as some people think it should be, right? But I think most people's experience of writing and language is all about the way that it should be, meaning we're talking about grammatical correctness. And not to say that there aren't kind of more or less hard and fast rules in every language about what you can say grammatically and what you can't, right? in English, word order is going to matter a great deal. And the way that prepositions work together and subject verb agreement, but less it's less important uh, than people really let on. It's just the social stigma that gets attached to it, right? Um, you can still understand people like subject verb agreement, right? If someone you know uh, makes a mistake in subject verb agreement, I still generally can understand what they're saying, um, whether they're writing or speaking. But there's the social stigma attached to it, as you said. There, we call it broken English or something like that. Um, and it's interesting that that's what we're seeing with my gal's report here, that students are focused on that, and maybe that is appropriate in an EFL kind of context. I know in my foreign languages that I'm trying to learn Polish, occasionally trying to brush up on my Spanish, I do care a great deal about the grammatical things because those are the things that I don't know a great deal of. But my teachers often tell me, you can still be understood, and that matters, right? I can still get, if I'm in Poland, I can still, get around well enough, and people can understand me well enough to accomplish things, which is, that's our shared way of thinking about things, right? Because we're interested in the social aspect of language. So.
No, but I think you're right that that's pointing to the way that we kind of talk about language, even early on, and even as somebody who takes a descriptivist orientation to this sort of stuff in my work, it is hard to keep that focus at times when trying to learn another language myself. That to be okay with not being able to you know do the grammar exactly right, because you're right. I mean, the point is, when you go to Poland, can you get around? Can you get things done? Can you figure out where you need to go and what you're trying to do? I mean, ultimately, that's why you're using Polish.
And the same with the students in academia. Can they accomplish what they need to do in school? So I want to kind of wrap things up here, just kind of asking who do you think this article is for? I do want to just to answer that before I even let you answer it. I want to read this last passage because I think my gal had audience definitely in mind here. He writes, this is the last paragraph. Based on the results presented above, the results could be an advantage for the university to know the factors that are causing students to have errors in writing. The English major could use the results to develop English writing courses to serve the needs of learners so that learners can improve their English writing skills more efficiently. Also, in order to prepare Thai students for the world arena, English writing will be required for effective communication. Accordingly, is important for this field of study. So I think he notes a couple of things there in terms of who this is for and how it might help. Did you get anything out of that?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a good point that the author's making there, in terms of who they imagine could find, who would find this useful. I think we, would have to probably step back a little bit and say that I don't know how much of this study could be generalized to really even the university, because it was in a particular class, and they were looking at third year students, if I remember correctly. And so, like, I do think you'd want to be a little careful. I think you would need more of these studies, and I think that this author has actually done some of that work in other courses. They mentioned what we would call a freshman level course, as something they had done before. Um, but I think, if you really want to understand these questions that they're asking in the survey to a more broad general university audience, you'd want to do multiple of these and kind of make sure you're sampling from multiple year levels and different kinds of courses and that sort of thing, to so you could maybe generalize a little more. But I do think it's a nice set of, it would be a nice tool to use to do that in your own classes to kind of gauge where your students are in terms of their perceptions of your own teaching of writing. Where do the students perceive that they struggle, and maybe compare that to what you're seeing them actually struggle with, and do those things align well? Are there gaps in your teaching? You can again you can kind of measure the take the temperature of the room to try to figure out pedagogically what you want to do next, maybe.
Absolutely. It's funny that you're the one that brings up generalizability because that's always my hobby horse, right? You beat me to it. Um, uh, but but you're right. I think that my gal definitely wanted to use this for this particular class. This data is helpful for this particular class and this particular context, but generalizing beyond it. But I absolutely think that that an instrument like this could be useful. I would change a few things. I again, it's not immediately clear to me how these constructs, the items for the different constructs, don't seem especially aligned for me. It's hard to me. It's hard for me to get um, kind of a validity read on some of them. Um,
Sure.
and just uh, to explain, I guess for some folks who may not be as familiar, um, when you have something that you're interested in understanding that is more abstract or more of a kind of social construct, like for example, one of the constructs that he's interested in looking at is factors causing students to have errors in writing. That's table 9, and then he makes a list of all of these things. As we noted before, uh, the in as we noted before, those items could be you could write those items, those questions, a lot of different ways. Um, and this one actually seems pretty well aligned. I don't have too many problems, except there aren't a lot of global issues there, except maybe communication breakdown. That's kind of a global issue. But the other one, like respondent
Hmm.
strategy and attitude toward writing in English. Strategy and attitude are two very different constructs for me, and grouping them together
Yeah.
seems a little problematic. So I think I would probably separate things. But to your point or whatever, anyone who is interested in trying to understand what their students' perceptions are, this is a good study to kind of get a potential set of questions that they could ask their students. This is an instrument that you could use as a model and modify as you see fit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, in terms of modification. I think even in that same table, table 9, I was thinking, what motivated the author to ask about those specific things? Article usage, adjective usage, active passive voice. I
Right.
assume those are things that maybe the author knew that the students struggled with already, or perhaps they're things that they perceived that Thai speakers struggle with. But either way, I think you're right. You modify it based on what you want to know about your students, and whatever language they happen to be learning.
Thanks a lot, Josh. And now we're going to move on to the next segment, which is our recommendation corner. All right. So now we're going to talk about stuff that we are reading. This is recommendation corner, and um, there's only one rule. It can't be academia. We already beat that dead horse reading that article. So, what's something that you're reading, not non-academic?
All right, so I have I mentioned I grew up in Kentucky in my intro, but I have a lot of my family still back in Kentucky and Southern Ohio, um, which is the tri-state area there. Anyway, I have a nephew who's a high schooler, and through various quarantining and those sorts of things. he had shown an interest to me in reading and discussing readings with me, which I thought was pretty cool. Um, he actually had recommended the Percy Jackson series. So I actually picked up the first Percy Jackson book, Lightning Thief, and I have him pick out what chapters he wants us to read for next time, and we had our first session yesterday where we just chatted over the phone about the first 6 chapters of Percy Jackson. And just kind of neat to see a kid who's really interested in Greek and Roman mythology and that sort of stuff, and be able to kind of nerd out on a book with a nephew. So that's what I've been reading in the non-academic world.
That's really cool. I don't know much about um, the Percy Jackson books. You said it's mostly about like Greek and Roman mythology, and it's like an analog to Harry Potter, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think I have read. I can't remember if I read. I know I read the first book in one of Rick Riordan's. I guess that's how he says his name's series. I can't remember if it was the first one in this one or one of the others. But yeah, I think they're kind of based on different kinds of mythologies. I'm at the beginning of this one, first few chapters, and Percy Jackson is they call themselves, I think, half breeds. I think they're like, they have a parent that's a god and one parent that's not. I am in no way versed in mythology, so it's been kind of fun because my nephew he's really into it,
That's
Greek
cool.
and Roman mythology. So he's been teaching me a lot of things, just in those first couple in those first few minutes of our conversation. So that was a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
How about you, man? What are you reading?
Yeah, yeah. I want to recommend Rest: Why You Get More Done When You Work Less by Alex Sujung Kim Pong. Hope I'm getting the name right. This is I'm about halfway through this, and I heard about it. I think through the Art of Manlius podcast. And I love that podcast, and I get so many great recommendations from that podcast. Um, but it's just about the science and history behind rest and its role in our working lives, and especially in creative work. Why it's really important to rest. There's a lot of interesting and somewhat controversial ideas in here, like the 4-hour workday, um, and but there's also more kind of practical strategies, um, about how you how you might manage your time, why you might want to, even if you're like me, a night owl, might want to commit to more of a morning routine, and trying to get started in the morning. I highly recommend it. It's great. There's some aspects of it that I'm not especially interested in. He does a lot of these histories of famous people and their work habits, and I'm like, I don't really care. Just give me the science. But for some folks, that would definitely be interesting. Learning what famous great minds did. So definitely want to recommend that. Cool, cool. Hey man, thanks a lot for joining me, and thanks to all the listeners out there, all 3 of you, I'm sure, for for joining us. Hope we can do this again sometime. If you have any feedback, questions, you can contact the podcast at descriptivistspod@gmail.com. That's descriptivists with an S, POD @gmail.com. And if you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe for new episodes. Thanks for listening.